Welcome to another YouTube live event from Quant Reasoning. This time we are talking about sentence correction. I'm going to give you the big takeaways of the day in the beginning of the session this time so that you know what we're going to explore and what we're going to try to learn today. So I think probably all of the takeaways can be put under one title, which is sentence correction is part of a section called verbal reasoning, with the emphasis on the word reasoning. So when people just study a bunch of grammar and focus too much on that grammar, they're not going to do as well on sentence correction as they could if they focused a bit more on reasoning. So that's really the purpose of today, is to explore what that exactly means, what that looks like, and how that should impact our strategies when we try sentence correction on the test. So that's kind of the overarching plan and takeaway for the day. Now, some of the things that come out of that are, number one, I know that a lot of people like to start with a glance at the answer choices. They like to see what's the initial split in the very beginning of the answer choices. And the problem with that is there's two problems with that. One, it makes you feel a lot of pressure to pick a side, to choose in that initial split one way or the other way, and often they're both fine, and it's just a distraction, right? So that's one big issue. The other big issue is that you haven't even read the original sentence yet. So how are you supposed to be able to tell which way to go, which one is right, which one is wrong? It puts you in this grammar mindset right off the bat, and you're off to a bad start because you're no longer thinking about the reasoning piece. You're no longer thinking about why the author wrote this sentence and what the purpose of the sentence is. Instead, you're just thinking about a grammar issue of which way to go with this split. So that's one big takeaway that we're going to have today. Another one is the non-underlined text in the original sentence. So what happens often with people taking the GMAT is they focus a lot more on the underlined text because they think that's what I'm being tested on. And they give very little attention, sometimes zero attention, to the thing that, in my opinion, is the most important thing on the computer screen. That's the non-underlined text. And what makes it so important is that the non-underlined text goes with all 5 answer choices, whereas the underlined text only goes with, I increased my volume a bit there, hopefully that's helpful. The non-underlined text only goes with, the underlined text is only answer choice A. The other 4 answer choices are all different. So mathematically speaking, the non-underlined text is 5 times as important as the underlined text. So that's a second big takeaway that we're going to have today. Good, looks like the volume is better now. So let's jump into the first question of the day. I'm going to give you all a little bit of time to consider what the author's purpose is in this sentence and which answer choices you might be able to eliminate just based on that. So, and by the way, I'm not against grammar. I think it is necessary to know a fair bit of grammar in order to do well in sentence correction. The problem is when people just focus on grammar and lose sight of the big picture, lose sight of why the sentence was written in the first place. So that's what we're going to see today. Let's jump into the first question. Okay, so let's focus on the non-underlined text here. This sentence is starting with the following phrase: using study groups managed by the blah, 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 comma. So whatever comes after the comma has to be something that makes sense as the thing that is using the study groups. So when I look at the sentence as a whole, and I wonder, why did the author write this? What was the author's purpose with this sentence? He's saying, using study groups managed by the principal popular organizations and political parties, the Swedish public was informed by the government about energy and nuclear power. So I ask myself, who's using these study groups? The Swedish public or the government? One of those makes sense and the other doesn't. So I'll ask you all in the chat to let me know, which do you think makes sense as the entity that's using study groups? That's right, it has to be the government, because the Swedish public is the entity that's being informed about the whatever it is that they're being informed about, but the entity using the study groups has to be the government. It doesn't make sense any other way. And if you look at the options here in the answer choices, there's only one answer choice that gives us what we want, that gives us the government right after the comma. Now, to JD's point, yes, maybe the public is the study group, but if the public is the study group, then the public is not the one using the study group. You can't be both in the study group and using the study group. So yes, if the general public are the people participating in the study group, well, who's using the study group? It has to be the government. So if you really think about the logic of this sentence and what makes sense and what doesn't, it has to be the government, and that narrows us down to a single answer choice B. Okay, let's move on to the second question of the day. And by the way, take a deep breath, prepare to read the original sentence and think deeply about what it says and why the author wrote it. Okay, so I'm going to call out something that JD wrote there in the chat, not liking the word but. And I think you're right to look at the word but and to wonder, does the word but make sense or not? Because this is verbal reasoning, and the word but is probably the most important word in the whole sentence. So I think that's a good place to start. Let's ask ourselves, what's the author's purpose in writing this sentence? Is the author a big fan of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund? Is the author criticizing them? Is the author, why did the author write this? And it looks like, as I'm looking at the entire text there in the top of the screen, the author starts by telling us what they were created for. So they were created to reduce poverty and stabilize foreign currency markets. That was the purpose for which these things were created. And now he tells us, according to some critics, so we're about to get a critical view of those organizations, they continually struggled to meet the expectations of their major shareholders. And then we have some text in between two dashes. By the way, you might want to glance at the answer choices just to see, are there any differences in between the two dashes? And you'll see that no, they're all exactly identical in between the dashes. So that's not an important part. So they continually struggled to meet the expectations of their major shareholders, but neglected their intended beneficiaries in the developing world. So does the word but make sense in this context? Are we getting a positive and a negative? They continually struggled to meet the expectations of their major shareholders, but neglected. So struggled to meet, I could interpret that in two different ways, right? Struggled to meet could be really negative, like they couldn't meet the expectations. So, they failed in meeting the expectations. But it could also mean that they really tried very hard. Right? They struggled to meet. It was a real struggle. They really put in their best effort, but neglected. So I think the word neglected is very important, because I would say that the word neglected is the opposite of struggled to meet. Because neglected means they didn't even try. So I'm not so sure that I agree with you, JD, that the word but doesn't make sense here. The word neglected means they didn't even try, and the words struggled to meet the expectations means they didn't meet them. They most likely failed to meet those expectations, but at least they tried. Does that make sense? So I wouldn't eliminate the word but just yet. Now I'm getting there in the chat from Vivek, something about parallelism, and I think that's right. Now, a lot of people think parallelism is all about grammar. I disagree. I think there is some grammar to it, but really it's a lot more about meaning than it is about grammar. The two things that are parallel need to be comparable things of the same type. And we do have some parallelism here. Whether you go with but or you go with and, doesn't matter. Either way, you need parallelism. So we have struggled but neglected in A. We have struggled while neglecting. So that's not parallel, but maybe it doesn't have to be, because you have the word while. Now, I think JD was the one who mentioned the word that in B, while neglecting that of, and the that there doesn't make any sense. It's not referring to anything that we can point at. Answer choice C has the same issue with the word that. Answer choice D had to struggle continually while neglecting that. So B, C, D all have the word that. Again, the word that just doesn't have anything to refer to, and that's why we can eliminate B, C, and D. And I guess some people would call that grammar, right? We have the word that and it's not referring to anything. I would still call this meaning. That has to refer to something. And there's nothing sensible for it to refer to. And E, struggled and neglecting the parallelism there is broken. So we're down to answer choice E. Okay? I hope that you're getting as a takeaway from all of this the importance of really taking the time at the front end, at the top of the screen, at that original sentence, and really digging into the purpose of the sentence. Why is the author writing this? Okay? And also, don't be too quick to eliminate the word but. Really think about what these things are saying. Struggled to meet the expectations could be the opposite of neglected, for the reason that I mentioned earlier. All right, let's move on. Okay, so this sentence is starting with the words, in no other historical sighting did something blah, 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 blah. And this is not underlined, so it's very, very important. In no other historical sighting did so-and-so. That means that we are comparing something that happened or didn't happen, or the degree to which it happened, in different historical sightings. So I can already tell, if I just read the first 8 words, let's say, of this sentence, in no other historical sighting did Halley's comet cause, I can already tell that there have been multiple historical sightings of Halley's comet. You agree? Just from those first 8 words, we can infer that there have been multiple historical sightings of Halley's comet, and that comet caused sensations, I suppose, in each sighting. But it's saying that in no other historical sighting, so the word other there is really the key to knowing that there have been multiple. There have been multiple of these historical sightings, and in one of them in particular, there was a worldwide sensation, the likes of which we did not see in any other of those historical sightings. So this is comparing the degree of the sensation, the level of sensationalism in different historical sightings of Halley's comet. So whatever the right answer choice is going to be, it has to be talking about in a historical sighting. In. The word in there in the very beginning of the sentence. You see that non-underlined word in the very beginning, in? It has to be repeated because we're comparing in this historical sighting versus in all these other historical sightings. And there's only one answer choice that has the word in. That's answer choice C. So just from thinking about the purpose of the sentence, again, to compare the level of sensation that occurred in different historical sightings, I need the word in. And I don't view this as a grammar issue. I view this as a meaning issue, because we need to compare like with like. If we're comparing in all these other historical sightings, we need to be talking about in this historical sighting in particular, and that takes us to a single answer choice C. I'm getting a good question there in the chat. How do I know when to pause? It was obviously useful here to pause at the words in no other. I think that the appropriate place to pause is when you're getting something that feels structural as opposed to detail. And this is critically important for reading comprehension, by the way, because in reading comprehension, they're going to ask us, what was the primary purpose of that passage? And the primary purpose is not hiding in the details. The primary purpose is in the structural stuff. So just to give you an example with this sentence, what I mean by details. Historical sighting is a detail. Halley's comet is certainly a detail. The word cause is not a detail. That's structural, because you've got cause and effect. In no other is a structural thing, because you have a comparison there. Worldwide sensation, that's a detail. Its return in 1910 to 1911, that's a detail. Okay. When I see structural stuff like the word but that we saw earlier, like the words in no other, where you have a comparison, and we'll see a few more examples today, that's where I pause to really think about what the author is attempting to do here. And again, the same goes for reading comprehension. And I guess one way to define verbal reasoning is that, right? Verbal reasoning is all about the structural language that that implies the purpose of the text. Because the purpose of the text won't be in the details, it'll always be in the structural stuff around the details. All right, let's move on. All right, we have to ask ourselves why the author wrote this sentence. Do you think that the author's main priority here was to tell us, to let us know that the oceans cover 71% of the Earth's surface? Was that kind of the objective of this sentence, and everything else is just kind of by the way? Or maybe you think that the main purpose of this sentence was to let us know that the oceans play an essential role in maintaining the conditions for human existence on land. And everything else in the sentence is just there to support that in some kind of manner. Or maybe, in fact, the purpose of the sentence was to let us know about how the oceans moderate the temperature and how they give pure water back to the atmosphere through evaporation. What was the author's main priority here? What is the author trying to convey above all else? And Abhishek is correct. Well done, Abhishek. The author's reason for writing this sentence was to let us know that the oceans play an essential role in maintaining the conditions for human existence on land. Now, how can we tell that that's the main purpose? Well, for one thing, if the author's purpose was just to let us know that the oceans cover 71% of the Earth's surface, then the author would have just said that. And the sentence would have ended there. Why add all this other stuff? In what way does this other stuff help the author convey his or her point? It doesn't. If the author's main purpose was just to let us know about how the oceans moderate temperature and give back water, then the author would have just said that. Why give us all this other stuff? So it has to be that the author's main purpose was to tell us about how the oceans play an essential role, which means that the part about how the oceans cover 71% is just there to kind of give us maybe some context, some background information. And then what would you say is the role of the last little bit, the part that's not underlined? How the oceans moderate the temperature and give water back. What's the purpose of that? Why would the author put that in there if the author's primary purpose is to let us know about how the oceans play an essential role? Let me know in the chat. What do you think is the reason to even have that ending there that's not underlined? Well done, Abhishek. You're on fire today. That's right. The reason the author has the non-underlined text at the end is to support his claim that the oceans play an essential role. Without that last part of the sentence, why should we believe the author? Right? Just because the author says that the oceans play an essential role doesn't mean that it's true. So the author is giving some support to help convince the reader that, yes, in fact, the oceans do play an essential role. And with that, I think we might be ready to look at the answer choices. But I think there's maybe one more thing we want to do before that, and that's really focus on the non-underlined text at the end. And I see someone in the chat already spotted it there. We have a comma and at the end of the sentence. And after the comma and, we have this ing word. We have giving. So parallelism is going to require that we have something that matches giving. And from our logical analysis, we already know that moderating the temperature goes with giving pure water back. Those are kind of two elements in the list of things that support the author's point. So I'm really not focused here on grammar. I'm focused on why the author wrote this sentence and how the different pieces work together to help the author convey his message. This is quite similar to the boldface question type in critical reasoning. We really have to think about the role that each part of the sentence plays in the sentence. Okay. Now I see another good comment there in the chat, which is that a comma ing is often used to convey an unintended consequence of the previous clause, or to convey the manner in which the subject does the verb in the preceding clause. In this case, it's the latter, right? The oceans play an essential role. Okay, and in what way, in what manner do the oceans play an essential role? Moderating temperature and giving pure water back. So now that we go to the answer choices, I'm wondering, is there more than one possible answer choice at this point, now that we've done all that analysis? I would eliminate C, D, and E because they're starting by saying the oceans cover 71%. So that shifts the primary purpose of the sentence from the oceans play an essential role to the oceans cover 71%, which we all agreed was not the author's primary purpose here. So C, D, E are gone. And then B falls because of parallelism. It says the oceans moderate and giving. So that's wrong. So it has to be A at that point. And I wonder, let me know in the chat, do you see how spending extra time at the top of the screen before going to the answer choices can really help us speed up our work in the answer choices themselves? And also enables us to not rely so heavily on grammar because we're using reasoning, which again is the purpose of sentence correction. It's to test our reasoning, not to test our grammar. I mean, if it was really a grammar test, then business schools wouldn't be interested in it because business schools don't need us to have perfect grammar. We're not going to school to become a newspaper editor. We're going to school to be business people. Well, who cares about grammar? But it's not about the grammar. It's about the verbal reasoning. And I think that's why these questions are designed in such a way that you can eliminate a lot of answer choices just by using some good old-fashioned reasoning. Let me know in the chat if you see that. Good. All right, let's keep this moving. All right, why did the author write this sentence? We've got really two pieces to this sentence. Piece number one, insurance companies in California were free to charge whatever rates the market would bear, which, by the way, wow, mind blown, right? That's incredible that they were free to do that. And then piece number two, these insurance companies needed no approval from regulators before raising rates. How do these two pieces relate to one another? Are they kind of two separate pieces and the word and would make sense in between them? Or maybe the word but would make sense in between them? What's the relationship between those two pieces? Is the second piece just adding additional information relative to the first piece? Is it explaining the first piece? Is it surprising in the context of the first piece, in which case we'd start with the word although? What's the relationship between them? What's the relationship there? Why did the author even give us the second piece? Why didn't the author just finish the sentence after the word bear? Why not just stop there? Why do we need a second piece? Is the second piece giving us a reason for why the insurance companies were free to charge whatever they wanted? Is it giving us a explanation of the manner in which they were free to charge whatever rates they wanted? Is it giving us an unintended consequence of the fact that they were free to charge whatever rates they wanted? Yeah, so if it's there in order to explain the manner in which insurance companies were free to charge, or explain an unintended consequence of the fact that they were free to charge, either of those would require a comma ing, because that's what a comma ing does after a clause. And I admit this is grammar, but it's grammar that's very strongly linked to meaning, because we're saying these are the two appropriate meanings for which you would use a comma ing. Either it's describing an unintended consequence of the fact that the subject did the verb, or it's describing the manner in which the subject did the verb. And I think both of those, or somewhere in between those, is what makes sense in this sentence. It's describing how or what was the consequence of the fact that the insurance companies were free to charge, and that's why I'm going to go with answer choice A. That's the only one that gives me that comma ing. I'm going to say that B and C make no sense to me with the use of the word and, because and would be more appropriate if we were looking at a list of two things that are kind of, separate and on a level playing field, whereas here we have a much more interesting relationship between the two pieces. It's not just a list of two distinct items. There's a strong relationship between them where one is a consequence of the other. And the comma with, theoretically, yeah, maybe that could work, but A just does the job a lot better, and I'm going to go with that one. And again, we're not diving deep into grammar today, so that's why I'm kind of keeping it somewhat superficial and just really practicing looking at the purpose of the different pieces of the sentence and how that can help us in narrowing down onto the right answer. Let's look at another one. So the questions are getting a bit harder. Can anyone let me know in the chat box which of these answer choices can definitely be eliminated just based on reasoning? One of these answer choices just misses the mark on the purpose of the sentence. Yes, Surajit, you got it. D, answer choice D, delta, is definitely wrong just by reasoning. So if we look at the words precisely the opposite, those are the first words in the non-underlined text, right? So something is precisely the opposite. Answer choice D doesn't have any structural language to match something that is precisely the opposite. The other answer choices all do have something, right? You've got a semicolon instead in A and C. So A and C have that semicolon instead. So that matches the precisely the opposite. Answer choice B has the word but. And answer choice E has the word other than. Okay, so just superficially looking at the structural language and whether or not it makes sense in the context of saying precisely the opposite, we can eliminate D, delta. Now, I'm getting a really good message there from Vivek in the chat. You're right, a conception can't be a substitute for a telephone. And that eliminates A. Marconi's conception of the radio was a substitute for the telephone. A conception can't be a substitute for a telephone because those are not things that are comparable. So you're right, Vivek. A is illogical for that reason, and we can eliminate it for that reason. Now, we're down to B, C, and E. And I'm getting a request there to analyze the original sentence, not the answer choices. So let's do that. Marconi's conception of the radio was as a substitute for the telephone, comma, a tool for private conversation. So when the author says a tool for private conversation, he's just reminding us what a telephone is, in case we forgot. And so what is a telephone? It's a tool for private conversation. And by the way, that's amazing that, I don't know who Marconi is, but it's amazing that somebody thought of the radio as something that would be used for private conversation. Nowadays that seems really strange. But that's what Marconi thought. Instead, it is precisely the opposite. Okay, so we knew that, right? The radio ended up not being a tool for private conversation. It's a tool for communicating with a large public audience. And if we really focus on the non-underlined text, as we should, what do we have there? Precisely the opposite, comma, a tool for communicating with a large public audience. So let's go to the remaining answer choices now. B says Marconi conceived of the radio as a substitute for the telephone, comma, a tool for private conversation, comma, but which is precisely the opposite. So we have which is talking about what in answer choice B? That's right, Anurag. Very good. The which has to refer to something nearby, and it's trying to talk about the radio. Right? We know that the non-underlined text at the end is describing the radio, a tool for communicating with a large public audience. So the which doesn't make any sense here, and we can eliminate B for that reason. And I admit that I'm using grammar here. That's totally grammar. Okay, so if you didn't know this, a which, really any noun modifier, likes to be close to the noun that it's trying to modify. In this case, we have a bunch of nouns in between radio and which, and so that eliminates B. The other one that we still have in play is E. Marconi conceived of the radio, well, C and E. C is the correct answer, by the way. Let's just look at E. Marconi conceived of the radio to be a substitute for the telephone, a tool for private conversation, other than what it is. It referring to radio, it referring to telephone. Now let's say that a reasonable person would be able to infer that it's talking about radio. Okay, let's say that we know that it is radio. So what does it say? Marconi conceived of the radio to be a substitute for the telephone, a tool for private conversation, other than what the radio is, comma, precisely the opposite, comma, a tool for communicating with a large public audience. There's just no good reason to have such a complicated, convoluted, wordy representation of the author's point, when instead you can have answer choice C, which conveys that in a much clearer manner. So that's why I would pick C over E. Exactly, Jainam. Good. All right, let's look at this next one. Yeah, I'm seeing some great comments there in the chat. The structural stuff in this sentence, the most important stuff here, is the very first word, unlike. That's a structural word. It has nothing to do with any particular detail. And the comma in the first line of text. See that comma at the end? Not the first comma, the second comma. The comma at the very end of the first line of text. That's the comma that goes with the word unlike. So when you start a sentence with the word unlike, you're going to have unlike X, comma, Y. And I know that the second comma is the one that goes with the word unlike, because the first comma is followed by the word whose research was based. So that's just describing the X. So you've got unlike X, comma, description, comma, Y. So the X and Y need to be things that are comparable. So luckily for us, the Y, the thing after the comma, is not underlined. So let's focus on that. It says the research conducted by blah, blah, blah. So we're talking about research. And so for a comparison, the first item, the X, must also be some kind of research. Which answer choices can we eliminate just thanks to the fact that we recognize that the first thing must be some kind of research? What can we eliminate? Amazingly, we can eliminate most of the answer choices. And by the way, this question is taken from the very end of the sentence correction chapter in the official guide. So that means that it is considered a very hard question. And so it's amazing to me that we can eliminate most of the answer choices. A, B, and C are all gone so quickly and so easily just by focusing on the non-underlined text, because that indicates to us what the underlined text must look like. Now, between the remaining two answer choices, we can still use meaning, we can still use reasoning to pick out the right one. You see, there's an important difference between D and E in terms of meaning. In D, it's saying that the automobile company's research, having been based on crashes involving SUVs, and then we're saying, unlike that research, the research conducted by the insurance company took into account such factors as a driver's age, sex, and previous driving record. These factors, driver's age, sex, and previous driving record, are not the opposite. They're not different from basing your research on crashes involving SUVs. If it was really about that, then we'd look for something like, hey, those guys based their research on crashes involving SUVs, whereas those other guys based their research on crashes involving sedans or motorcycles or something like that. But when we look at the non-underlined thing at the end, it's saying, it's talking about the factors that were taken into account. So I'm not expecting the automobile company's research to be focused on or to be based on crashes involving sport utility vehicles. That's not what the comparison is about, and therefore I'm going to go with E. That's really the important difference between D and E, is on that emphasis, right? Is the emphasis of the comparison on the types of vehicles that the research was based on? No, that's not the emphasis of the comparison. The emphasis of the comparison is about the factors that were taken into account or were not taken into account, and that lands me on answer choice E. And I'm not going into the grammar of whether or not having been based on is right or not, because that's not the purpose of today, and also because I'm not sure. I'm not a grammar expert. But you shouldn't need to know that to do well in this test. In fact, the first time I took the GMAT, I knew zero grammar. Maybe I knew what a subject was and what a verb was, and that's about it. And I still did very well in sentence correction because I thought about the purpose of the sentence, and that's really, for the most part, that's all you need. Another thing that I forgot to mention in the beginning of this session is one of the big changes that have happened in sentence correction on the GMAT over the past 10 to 15 years is it used to be the case that grammar alone would eliminate 4 answer choices. And that's no longer the case. I hear reports from people going into the test center all the time for the past 10 years telling me that although grammar alone was enough for them on official material that's been published, official guides, official practice tests, etc., when they get to the test center, suddenly grammar only eliminates 2 or 3 answer choices, and then they're left having to guess between the last 2. And that's a change that the GMAT has made, and I think I know why they made it. Because it's not intended to be a grammar test, and you had all these people preparing for the GMAT studying a bunch of grammar and getting the right answer, and then it was no longer testing what it was intended to test. So now they create official questions on the actual test such that grammar will only take you so far, and you have to use meaning to hit the actual correct answer at the end. So that's an important thing to know, because doing well in sentence correction in the official guide and the official practice tests doesn't guarantee that you'll do well on actual sentence correction on the real test, because they've changed the way that they design those questions. You should also ask yourself, how do they choose which questions to retire from the test and therefore publish in the official guides, and which questions to not retire from the test? And if you think about that, anytime they decide to kind of change direction or shift very subtly what it is that they're trying to test, they'll retire the questions that don't really match that new direction. And that's what we're getting in the official guides. So we're getting a sample of questions that were chosen to be retired for some reason or another, and that makes it very dangerous to completely rely blindly on what we're seeing in the official guides. That's right, Joseph. The GMAT prep is not an accurate depiction of the real test. It's the most accurate that we have access to, by far. So I would much prefer it to any third-party practice test. But it's not 100% accurate because it has only questions that have been retired from the actual test. And you got to ask yourself, well, why were these questions retired? So it's as close as we can get to the real test, but No, it's not 100% accurate. Absolutely not. Now, the good news is GMAT questions change very slightly over long periods of time. So if you look at new questions now versus questions from 20 years ago, the differences aren't going to be huge. In fact, I would say that this issue in sentence correction that I've been talking about is probably the biggest change that I've seen over the last 15 to 20 years in how the GMAT tests what it tests. So don't panic. It's really, that one is the biggest one, I would say, that I've seen. Yeah. All right. So let's do just one more and then we'll call it a day. Okay, let's read the original sentence slowly and thoughtfully as we do. Gusty westerly winds will continue to usher in a seasonably cool air mass into the region. And I'm going to pause there just briefly because something already struck me as redundant. Does anybody see it? Gusty westerly winds will continue to usher in a seasonably cool air mass into the region. You see that? They're repeating the word in for no apparent reason. It's redundant. To usher into the region. Okay, so I'm making a mental note of that. I will be eliminating answer choices based on that, but I want to complete reading the original sentence all the way to the end and think deeply about the purpose of the sentence. So from the beginning, gusty westerly winds will continue to usher in a seasonably cool air mass into the region as a broad area of high pressure will build and bring fair and dry weather for several days. Now, unfortunately, I'm not a meteorologist, so I can't say how these pieces of information connect to one another. I can't say whether the gusty westerly winds are the reason for the broad area of high pressure building, or vice versa, or maybe they're unrelated, or maybe one is surprising in the context of the other. I don't know. I just don't have enough information about about meteorology. But I shouldn't need to know anything about meteorology in order to answer this question, because this is a test for business school, not for meteorology school. So let's think about this. If I don't know the manner in which they relate to one another, I can't really eliminate A for the reason that it has a comma as. The comma as, that's my connector there. Maybe that's appropriate, I don't know. So I'm a bit stuck here, but luckily I noticed the redundancy in the original sentence. So let's go ahead and eliminate the answer choices that repeat that redundancy. So A is gone, B is gone. It has that same redundancy in and into. And what else? Looks like that's it. Only A and B are gone. The other ones don't have that redundancy. So now I'm down to C, D, and E. Let's go one by one. So C, gusty westerly winds will continue to usher in a seasonably cool air mass to the region, comma, a broad area of high pressure building. Pause there for a moment. If you just have a comma connecting those two pieces, so first piece was the gusty westerly winds will continue to usher in the cool air mass, comma, a broad area of high pressure building. That second piece after the comma it's not a clause because it doesn't have a verb. You might think that building is a verb, but an ing is only a verb if it has a helping verb in front of it. Is building, are building, was building, then it's a verb. Without a helping verb in front of it, it's not a verb. So it's not a clause. So maybe we're starting a list of items here. Right? The first item is a seasonably cool air mass. I guess that would be the first item. And then the second item would be a broad area of high pressure building. But with that building there in the end, it doesn't make sense as a second item in the list. And if I continue answer choice C to the end, I have comma and bring. Wait, comma and bring. Bring is a verb. So we have a list of 3 items. The second item doesn't have a verb and the third item does have a verb. That doesn't make any sense. Call that parallelism if you want. I'll call it meaning. We can argue until the cows come home. Which it is. I think it's both. So let's go ahead and eliminate C. D. These gusty westerly winds will continue ushering a seasonably cool air mass in the region, comma, with a broad area of high pressure building and bring fair. Again, parallelism or meaning, and bring fair doesn't make sense as a second item in a list where the first item is with a broad area of high pressure building. So I would say C and D are both wrong for a similar reason, which is that the list of items doesn't make any sense. They both have the word and it just doesn't work. And that leaves us with only one answer choice. Answer choice E. Gusty westerly winds will continue to usher a seasonably cool air mass into the region while a broad area of high pressure builds, comma, which will bring fair and dry weather for several days. So from a logical standpoint, that makes sense. All of these things happening before the comma, those things will bring fair and dry weather for several days. And a lot of people here eliminate answer choice E because of the which. Remember earlier today we said the which likes to be as close as possible to the noun that it's describing. Here it's not really describing a noun, it's describing an entire phrase, but it's the only answer choice left standing, and it is the correct answer choice. So this was a big deal. When they published this question, a lot of GMAT instructors were like, hey, that shouldn't be right. They don't allow this on the GMAT. Well, it turns out they do. And E doesn't have the redundancy because it doesn't have the word in earlier on. It just says gusty westerly winds will continue to usher a seasonably cool air mass into the region. The word in isn't in there the way that it was in A and B. And usher into is not redundant. No. Usher in into is redundant. Okay, so, and by the way, people who do the glance ahead of time, glancing at the beginnings of the answer choices, they see to usher, infinitive, that's an infinitive, to usher versus ushering, and they immediately get hung up on that difference. And they think, I must choose one or the other, but it turns out that they're both fine. So this is what I mean when I say that the glance just puts you into that frame of mind of it's all about the grammar and, you know, not thinking about the big picture, not thinking about the author's purpose. And in many cases, that initial split isn't even important because both sides of it are totally fine. And that's what's happening in this question. So I think that's an important takeaway of the day. So, yes, I'll repeat quickly why C and D are wrong with the word and. The word and means that you have a list of either two things or more than two things. In the case of answer choice D, it's exactly two things, and I can tell that because there's no comma before the word and. So when you have the word and without a comma in front of it, you're looking definitely at a list of two items only. And those two items in answer choice D have to be, number one, with a broad area of high pressure building, and number two, bring fair and dry weather for several days. So those are not parallel elements. You can't say with a broad area of high pressure building and bring fair and dry weather. They're just not parallel. And a similar issue with C. With C, we don't know if the list is of only two items or more than two items because there is a comma in front of the word and, so it could be one or the other. But either way, a broad area of high pressure building is going to be an element in that list, and it goes again with bring fair and dry weather. So for the same reason as with D, it just doesn't work as a list of items. They're just not parallel. Just for my own purposes and curiosity, can you all let me know in the chat, are you planning to do the glance or not do the glance going forward when you do sentence correction? I'd love to hear your honest response. So glancing at the initial split in the answer choices before reading the original sentence, yes or no? Continue to do the glance or no longer doing the glance? And JD, to your question, okay, that's fine. So maybe broad area of a high pressure is just a noun modifier to region. But then the thing after the and needs to also be just a noun modifier to region because it's a list of things. So whatever the first item in the list is doing, the second item in the list has to also be doing the same thing. They have to have the same role in the sentence. Again, going back to bold-faced questions in critical reasoning, the word and has to connect items that serve the same purpose, that have the same role in the sentence. And that's why C and D are wrong. And yes, it may take you more than 1.5 minutes per question when you first attempt to do what I showed you here today. But with practice, you'll see that you actually become a lot faster than you used to be. Because this doesn't actually take a lot of time when you know what you're doing. When you've done it a bunch, this can all be very, very quick, as you'll see. So I hope that you'll all practice this kind of approach going forward, and I would love to hear from you in the future. So maybe you can just find this video on YouTube and put in the comments how it's been going for you. Thank you all so much for joining me here today, and I hope to see you in the future. Bye for now. If you found this video useful, go to quantreasoning.com for a lot more where that came from. You should also click that like button and let me know in the comments below what you'd like me to make future videos about. And of course, if you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and do that and click that bell below so you get notified about future videos. See you next time.